Okay, good evening, fellow antiquers. My name is David Ledachowski, and I'm going to spend the next little while telling you about my favorite mistress.
Nice t-shirt.
I'm going to be talking about my favorite subject.
Nice t-shirt.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we'll get to that. I'm going to be talking about my favorite subject, so you may have to clap me down because I can go on and on. But in the interest of time, I've whittled this down to 2.5 hours. So bear with me. I'm going to start at the beginning. I was born on August 23rd, 1966. I've always loved motorcycles. My first one was one of those Princess Auto mini bikes that my dad bought for me with the Tecumseh engine. I was probably 12, 13 at the time, so I rode that for a little while in my teens, and as I got a little older in my teens, but still not old enough to have a valid license, he got me, it was a late 60s or early 70s, it was a Suzuki street bike, and it was a two-stroke. It had a chrome gas tank with black panels. I have no idea what it was other than it was a 250, two-cycle, two-cylinder, 250 Suzuki. It was fast. Someone will know here, I'm sure. Fun bike. I used to tour the gravel roads around Fisher Branch. I was, maybe 14, 15, and, I'd get 2 or 3 miles away, and then I'd push it home because those pot metal shifters broke off and stuff. And a little later, I still wasn't licensed, but he bought me a CB 750.
Oh. That sounds smart.
Yeah, looking back, I wonder, he must have had a life insurance policy on me or something. I remember I was about 4 miles away from one. You always have to watch because you didn't want to be pushing the bike home when the cops are around and you're underage and there's no plate and all that stuff. But the timing chain broke on me on that bike and seized up the engine, and I kind of went for a skid. I didn't fall down, it was all good, but that was my early experience with Japanese bikes. So after I got my license, I found a 1966 Triumph Bonneville in a rigid frame with a one of those long twisted Springer front ends on it. There wasn't much stock about it except the engine and transmission. And I went through it. It was a fun bike, I guess, but my back was a lot stronger then. Me and a buddy left Toulon, and by the time we got to Arberg, well, he had stopped 3 times to pick up parts that fell off. And I thought, well, I always wanted a Harley. In the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you could tell a Harley from a mile away. Not like now. They had a different look, a different stance.
You could hear it.
They sounded different, they looked different, they just held this appeal to me. And I always heard about the vibrations and everything about Harleys, and I thought, after riding an English bike, it can't be any worse.
David 1, Thompson 0.
Little did he know what he was coming into.
In 1991, I bought a 1981 shovel head. And for those not familiar with the Harleys, what is a shovel head? The shovel head engine was Harley's big twin, and when I say shovel head, panhead, knucklehead, keep in mind these were not Harley designations, these were nicknames from riders. The Harley was the EL and then the FL, the FLH, that was their designation. So I bought an 81 Super Glide. I absolutely love that bike. I got it cheap at the time, I paid $5,000 for it. I was constantly tinkering with it over the years. And
As one does.
now we're tied. But after having this bike for a few years, I started thinking, I was born in 1966, and I always liked the old baggers. The Super Glide is a trimmed down, it's a sport Harley, let's call it. Quite enough. So Harley-Davidson produced a shovel head engine from 1966 to 1984. I wanted a first year shovel and my birth year shovel. After sniveling to my wife for quite a few years, I was still riding the 81, and spending money on it constantly. And in 1998, I decided I wanted to maximize my RRSP, so I sold it. Never sell a bike to maximize your RRSP. What a dumb decision. In 1999, I was still looking, but I wanted a very stock 66. In 1999, my wife said, why don't you just shut up and buy a new bike? So I did. I bought a 1999 Road King Classic, and I did ride that till 2004, but I never, you know, there's bikes we all have that we'll remember for the rest of our lives. That was not one of them. I rode it all over. I put 80,000 clicks on it, and I sold it because at that time I wanted to build a shop. I was building a business, and naturally, I needed money to put into the business. Times are pretty tight. So our first year, we opened up our business in January of 04. In June, no, it wasn't very long, because I was on eBay and I happened to see this for sale on eBay. This is a oops. Okay, that should be big enough. It was up for $20,000 on eBay starting at the time. We had a new shop just opened. We were trying to make money. I quit my job, so you know, I went to Julie and I said, hey, you know what? She's like, yeah, right. It wasn't. We weren't on the same page. I watched this. I watched the eBay auction end, and then I phoned the guy. And the bike came out of Central California. So, and I couldn't afford to fly to Central California. I couldn't really afford the bike for that matter, or my wife said I couldn't. And I ended up talking to him after the auction, and I said, look, like, you know, video of it running, and he didn't. He said, I don't ride this bike. And to make a long story short, I ended up making a deal with him. Wired him money, never met him before. I got his information, I talked to his local bank, and he got my information. And at that time, our Canadian dollar was about 62 cents American. And my wife said, well, why don't you wait until the dollar comes up? The dollar's never going to come up, Julie. You know, that's what I told her, right? It's all, you know, in my mind, it's at 62. Of course, we know what happened by about 2010, 11, it was $1.10. But I have no regrets. This is a 1966 FLH FB Super Sport is the official designation. The first year of the Shovelhead. Ray Hoot is not here. I wish he was, because I like to say what an improvement it was over the Panhead. He'd like that.
This is being recorded.
Pass it along. And one of the best days of my life, you remember your wedding, you remember the birth of your first child, but when this bike shows up at your shop in the back of a semi, that's a life-changing moment.
And you're still married to me?
Still married, yeah.
You just bought it. Same woman?
Still have your RSP?
Sorry?
Still have your RSP?
I do, yeah, things went okay in the end. Okay. Now the bike, it's not the correct paint, but it has a lot of period correct trim. It's got the ball and chrome, period correct accessories, the baggage cart rails. The paint scheme is not correct, the color was close. I got it in 2005. In the summer of 2005, I changed all the oils. If I can figure out how to advance this. Okay. This was the only bike I could afford, and I like to ride my bikes. So I wanted to see what this was going to be like. So I changed all the oils. I checked the battery. It still had a lead acid battery. And me and my buddy took off to Assiniboia, Saskatchewan for the St. Victor Boogie. I checked the chain, of course, you know, the typical small stuff, lights. St. Victor, Assiniboia, Saskatchewan, it's about an 8-hour ride. Had I known after, like that winter when I took it apart, I probably would not have had the bravery to do this, but we went out there, had no problem, lots of vibrations. Not those high buzzy English vibrations, but the boom, boom, boom. American vibrations, good vibrations.
I have these boys too.
But you know what? Made it there back, no problem. Rode 8 hours back in the pouring rain. I remember having mild hypothermia at some restaurant in South Dakota just before we crossed the border, because I'm too tough to put my rain suit on, or too lazy. I don't know what it was. But that winter I took it apart, and the front sprocket, the teeth looked more like fish hooks than there was part of the vibration. It was bad. The hoses, Harley runs them from the oil pump up between the frame rail and the rear exhaust pipe, and there's not a lot of clearance. So these are rubber hoses. When I took them off, I could snap them. The bike obviously sat for a long time, but it made it there and back, so that inspired confidence. So I'd like to dispel some myth about the shovel head. Some people call them trouble heads. They're probably one of the big reasons that Harley has this reputation, especially in the 70s, for poor reliability, is shovel heads. And what I keep getting told is the guys that like them say, oh yeah, anyone can work on them. I think there's not as much wrong with the bike as there is wrong with previous owners, because everyone thought they could work on them. But when done right, I find them to be, you know, I'm not going to say there's maintenance free as a modern bike, but they're perfectly capable of traveling long distances. So I'm just going to scroll through a few quick picks because we have 2 hours to go. When I buy shovel heads, I now own 3 different shovel heads. When I got this one done after the first year, me and a buddy went to Eldred, Illinois. It's about an hour out of Chicago. I think it was 2 days. It was a fairly substantial trip. It was about 2,500 miles. I had 0 issues. I had a slight seep from a rocker box plug. Last year, me and a friend took my 1983. I was on my 1983. We went to New Orleans in a roundabout way. That was a 9,000 mile trip. The only issues were a couple of cracked air filter brackets. Last summer I have a 69 chopper, and because, you know how when you get older you think, man, I gotta do this. I never got to do it when I'm young, so I'm gonna do it now. And sometimes when you get halfway into this idea, it really seems like, man, I should have rethought this. But I have a 69 shovel head in a rigid frame with a DNA, a Chinese Springer front end, and I have friends in Green Bay, Wisconsin that I wanted to visit. So I took a weekend trip out there, and you know what? The highways are awesome in the States first, because I'll tell you, before I barely got on Manitoba, I'm thinking, yeah, I think I'll just go home, because this sucks. But I got into Wisconsin, and I came home on that chopper. It was 820 some miles in one Sunday. I left at 6:30 in the morning. I was home about 9 at night, and I ran out of gas once. But again, I had no issues. So there's my opinion about shovel head reliability. I think most of the issues with reliability is previous owners thinking they can work on them well, and maybe they can't. Other than that, since I redid this one, I have 38,000 miles on it since '07. Now I have 3, so I don't have to use and abuse it every year. A couple of facts about this 1966. It sold brand new in 1966 for about $1,600. It was the second last year of the mousetrap clutch for Harleys. Star hubs. Harley had used star hubs with loose rollers on the wheels from 1936, and 66 was the last year of that. And in 1966, the pan head, they had the shutoff on the left tank on top. You'd screw the thing in to shut the fuel off, and the outlet on the side, which makes sense, right? Because when the bike's leaning on the side stand, you want all the fuel flowing into that left tank. In 1966, for whatever reason, they decided to put it on the right tank at the front right there. It's a 1 year only thing. They went back pretty quick to the other side when they found out if you only have about a gallon of fuel in the tank and you go park somewhere and you leave it on the side stand, all the fuel drains into the left tank, and then you start it and you take off. It burns the fuel in the carb, and then you stall before all the fuel flows back. So. I think that's it. Any questions? Any derogatory comments? I thank you all for listening to me. Yeah.